That's what I wanted to hit, I think. Oh, well, we got that. Okay, I think it's working. That looks like it is. Yay. Oh, am I seeing? Yes, it says I'm live. I must be live. Good to have you folks with me this morning. Good to be together. I prefer to say it that way because we are together across distance and in many cases across time, because I know some folks are able to join with us live at 9 o'clock in the morning, Monday through Thursday, while others gather together, join us at other times. So this is good. We're across time and distance and time to get together. Good morning, Cheryl. Yes, you got a notification today. Good. So did I. So well, Facebook must have fixed that issue, which is good to hear. But notification of what? Notification of another episode of PB Reads the Bible. What's that? Well, I'm PB. I'm Pastor Brian here at Christ United Methodist Church. And PB Reads the Bible is this particular program where we gather together. And I do that. I read from the Bible. I don't just read it, I talk about it, try to help bring some things to light and to life for you. And in a particular way. And today is episode 7, excuse me. Today is episode 7 on our journey through the book of 2 Samuel, second half of Samuel, we might say. You know what? Excuse me one moment. Okay, sorry about that. Somebody wanted in the building, and I just needed to take care of that. I apologize, folks, but I'm back. I'm back in my creek. I'm back in my creek. So today is episode 7 on our journey through 2 Samuel. Episode 7 on our journey through 2 Samuel. So we're going to be looking at chapter 7. Yes, chapter 7. Before we do that, we'll talk about announcements and things. I believe tomorrow, good morning. Oh, we got some more checking in, which is great. I forgot to even mention that. Go ahead and check in, whether you're watching at the same time, whether you're here gathering together with us at 9 o'clock, or if you're here at a different time, doesn't matter. Please still check in. Also, when you have comments or questions, put them on the stream. Use the comment section, because I go back in to check and see what's going on. And we've got some more checking in. Good morning, John and Cindy. Woo-hoo. You got notification as well. Good. Maureen, good sunny morning. Good sunny morning to you as well. It's not too sunny here. This morning it's pretty cloudy and gray out, but I'm hoping that that's a good thing. I'm hoping that means we're going to get rain, but I don't know. I know there's a chance of rain for the next several days, but we need rain for the next several days. That would be awesome. Good morning, Marcia. Walking and listening. Wonderful. Great. So it's wonderful to have so many of you joining together with me and with each other this morning as we live life together. So that's the other thing, when you've got things you want to share so that we can keep each other surrounded and lifted up in prayer, go ahead and put those in the comment section as well. And of course, I know I end these things together with saying, watch for God being active in your life, and then share those thoughts. So I'm going to share one with you. What do we got? Golf on Wednesday. Hey, Bob, I have to double check my calendar now, because I have 2 meetings tomorrow morning. 2 meetings? I think I have 1 meeting tomorrow morning. What time? I think that's at 11:30 though, right, Bob? Okay, yeah, we're on. I'll be golfing tomorrow. But yeah, I do have a meeting early tomorrow morning, 7:30. And just in case, I'm hoping that I'm going to be done before 9 o'clock, but just in case, I'm going to pre-record tomorrow's session. So it'll be live for you at 9 o'clock, no matter what, but I won't actually be live. So still check in and do your comments and stuff tomorrow. But I'll get back to them later. I'll get back to them later. Oh, so anyway, I say watch for God. And I need to share this with you folks. I tell you to share those stories, and then I don't do it myself. So that wouldn't be very good. And this is actually from a couple weeks ago. I should have shared it then, and I didn't. The one day, and you might have seen the picture. I was out playing with the kids, running through sprinklers, which was fun. It was a blast. The kids loved it, which was extra important. The next morning, I was sitting here in my office, and that was the preschoolers. That was the preschoolers, like 3 and 4 year olds. And I was sitting here, and the thought came into my head, Brian, you haven't gone to see the older kids recently, the kindergartners and up, the school age kids in a while. I wonder what they're doing today. Why don't you go downstairs and say hi and see them? So I did. I left my office. I went down the steps, and I'm walking across the Wolf Hall, our lower level social hall, and I can hear slightly raised voices. I can hear a man and a woman, and I got a little bit closer, and I recognized the woman was the director from Noah's Ark, from the child care center, and the man was a parent, and voices were getting loud. But I walked into this not knowing what was taking place, but the timing was amazing. She turned to me and said, "Oh, great, thank you. Let's step out here into the hallway," something like that. I forget exactly the words, and brought him with her, which was wonderful. How she did that she got the gentleman separated from and I said gentleman, I was trying to keep that genderless, the individual away from the children and from the other staff members, got him out into Wolf Hall over by the tables, so that we were separated, and they were able to close the door so that the kids weren't bothered by these louder voices. And I'm not going to go into details as far as what the issue was, and what was taking place, why there was this, shall we say, heatedness taking place to their conversation. But I'll say that the individual recently lost their spouse. Their spouse died just several months ago. And so, and I already said this man is now raising, I think it's 2 children by himself. I was quickly able to identify, God gave me the ability to identify that he is going through profound grief. Obviously, that he has not had the time to process, for lack of better terminology. And so he is trying all these things, and he's trying to raise his children, and he's just struggling with life. And again, I think God gave me the words to intervene, to intercede, and to help address his issue. And I told him, "I'm so sorry that you're going through all of this stuff." And that was like almost all I had to say, and words came rushing out of his mouth. Learned a lot about the man in just a couple minutes. And I gave him the opportunity. I told him to, that I would be more than willing to listen more. So I'm hoping that God is going to continue to move in his life and direct him back to me. And it's God, not me, but his tension level and stress level and all that immediately seemed to drop very, very substantially, very quickly, and left much calmer than when I first got in there. And as soon as he left the room, the director and I looked at each other, just went like this and looked up. because I did not know anything was going on. I wasn't going downstairs to look for her. I was going downstairs to say hi to the kids. But it was where I needed to be at that moment. So that's God. That's God prompting. That was God prompting me to do that. So we serve a living God, right? Anyway, so that was my God moment. So now let's get to our work for today, shall we? 2 Samuel chapter 7. 2 Samuel chapter 7. Chapter 7 is an interesting chapter. This chapter is considered to be the most theological of any of the chapters of Samuel. It is the most theological of any of the chapters of Samuel. We're going to read it in two different sections because it's kind of broken up into two pieces. There's two scenes, we might say, in this chapter, in this story. The first scene is David and the prophet Nathan. And God, of course, in the background, but mostly it's Nathan delivering a message to, it's mostly Nathan delivering a message to David. The second half of this chapter, the second half of this story, the second scene, as it were, is David in prayer. It's an episode of David in prayer, which is not the first time that we've seen David in prayer, but this is different. This is very different. Both sections of the chapter, but especially this first section, the part with Nathan, can be seen as having been compiled over a long period of time and having several different influences. Some scholars say that the piece that seems to be, shall we say, kindest to David, strongest to David, is probably the oldest, and because they liked David, so to speak. But then along came an author in a time period where they perhaps thought David was being thought of and written about too highly. And so they bring a slightly more negative aspect to David, but they elevate God, shall we say. And then the third section of it seems to be that Deuteronomistic author, so from the period of the exile, trying to insert some stuff there, theological points, does raise David back up a little bit, but deals with things long past David's life. So let's read that section, shall we? And I think I'm going to read that whole section, this whole part involving Nathan, and then we'll go back and talk about it. Now, when the king was settled in his house, pause, that's an important word, house. But well, anyway, now when the king was settled in his house and Yahweh had given him rest from all his enemies around him, the king said to the prophet Nathan, "See now, I am living in a house of cedar, but the ark of God stays in a tent." Nathan said to the king, "Go, do all that you have in mind, for Yahweh is with you." But that same night, the word of Yahweh came to Nathan. "Go and tell my servant David, thus says Yahweh, are you the one to build me a house to live in? I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day, but I have been moving about in a tent and a tabernacle. Wherever I have moved about among all the people of Israel, did I ever speak a word with any of the tribal leaders of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, why have you not built me a house of cedar? Now, therefore, thus you shall say to my servant David, thus says Yahweh of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, to be prince over my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them. so that they may live in their own place and be disturbed no more, and evildoers shall afflict them no more, as formerly, from the time that I appointed judges over my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. Moreover, Yahweh declares to you that Yahweh will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will punish him with a rod such as mortals use, with blows inflicted by human beings. But I will not take my steadfast love from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you. Your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. In accordance with all these words and with all this vision, Nathan spoke to David. Pause. We're going to pause there. So I said, and I know I said I was going to read the whole thing and then go back, but then I interrupted myself, right? But that's because that word house is very important. And the Hebrew word that's translated house, and I have to check my notes on this, is bayit. We would say B-A-Y-I-T is how we would spell it in using English letters or whatever those are. But in different contexts, the word means like 4 or 5 different things. It can mean house. It can mean dwelling. It can mean palace. It can mean temple, or it can mean dynasty. The authors, or the author of that section, we don't know, but it seems that all the authors kind of picked up on that. Use that word intentionally. There's a serious bit of wordplay going on in here. And that word is used in here in several different ways. It is used as house. It is used as temple, or at least with the thought of temple. And it is used as tabernacle, and it is used as dynasty. It is used in all of those different ways in this story itself. We can actually even add to it palace. If we translate the first time it's used as house as palace, since that is what David was now living in. Okay, so when the king was settled in his palace and Yahweh had given him rest, see, now I'm living in a house of cedar, a palace of cedar, but God stays in a tent. No, so David makes this proposition to Nathan, doesn't even go into a whole lot of details. He just says, I'm seeing this as being wrong, that I'm in a house, this fancy house, and God is in a tent. And it's it would be probably not even the tabernacle, because the tabernacle may not have actually been used, but maybe some form of tent. It's not a solid building. But there's a couple things going on here. It would have been traditional in that time and in that place, and not among just Jews, not just among people of Israel, but any of the kingdoms of the time would want to build a house for their God, a place for their God, in order to centralize location of worship, and also to seek favor with their God, with the God of the land. So that's David wanting to build a house for God. We can see it as multiple levels there, one of which is straight out political, wanting to really set and establish his kingdom by pulling everything together. The context of temple, though, isn't really there it doesn't seem to be there in the earliest one. It's the latest edition by the Deuteronomistic author trying to build that up and bring it into temple. So the oldest author seems to be doing things and setting it up that David, because David wants to build the temple, God wants to bless David. So God's blessing and God wanting to establish a house for David, a dynasty for David, that's that same word, house, for David, seems to be in response to David's desire to build a house for God, a temple for God, even though God doesn't want that temple, right? But then the second author, the middle author, inserts some things in here with words like nevertheless and all of that, to indicate that it really has nothing to do with what David is doing. It's all God's will, to bless David. So we would say it's more based on grace than on David's works, which is why this passage was latched onto. One of the reasons why this passage was latched onto during the Middle Ages, during the Reformation, etc. Because it's all about what God has done. We can look at that in particular in verse 8. I took you from the pasture and to be sheep over the Israel. I have been with you wherever you want, and I have cut off all your enemies. So this seems to be coming from that middle author saying, I have done all these things, not because you've done anything for me, but I have done all these things. And attached to what God has done in the past, we then see God's promise for David in the future. I will make for you a great name. I will appoint a place for the people of Israel, for my people Israel, and I will give you rest from your enemies. Moreover, I will make you a house. I will make you a dynasty. So there's these words in particular seem to be coming from that second author, that middle author. And then the later author seems to be bringing in some of these later words, in particular speaking about your descendant, the one who follows you, or those who follow you. When he commits iniquity, I will punish him with a rod such as mortals use. So it seems to be from the exilic period author, Deuteronomistic author, because they're speaking about the past. They're speaking about things that have happened and punishments that have taken place. But the people in exile would also hear these as words because of promise and of hope, because in there it says, your house and your kingdom shall be made sure before me. Your throne shall be established forever. So those are words of hope to the people living in the Babylonian exile at the time. So we can see these three different authors and three different points of view. Now, so why else is David wanting to build this house, this temple? And why doesn't God want one? See, God doesn't actually want the temple built. Especially in the first answer, the earliest author just says no, basically says no. Did I ask you to do that? No, let's not do that. Here's what I'm going to do. It's only the second or third author that says, some other time you can build a house for me. Your descendant is going to build a house for me. That's coming from a later author, possibly the latest, the Deuteronomistic, wanting to elevate that temple. But the oldest author just says, I didn't ask for that. I'm fine. Basically saying, I'm fine living in a tent. I'm fine living in a tent. And why would that be the case? Why would that be the case? The idea, especially, like I said, at that time, it was common for the king, for a new king especially, to want to build that temple and that fixed house. And their thinking was that that's where God would live, not just a representation of God, but that God would live there in a fixed location, and they would have control over God, because a tent or a tabernacle is not a fixed location. It is something very movable. That's a little bit of a preview on a sermon in a couple of weeks, because we'll be talking about the God who lived in a tent. I see I got a question. For the Abrahamic covenant to be fulfilled, God must find a man among the Israelites to show the zeal to reach into eternity. Hence, David precedes Messiah Jesus, into whose house we are adopted. Shall the zeal to reach into eternity. Interesting. This passage is one, especially based on that, and it's based on the latest author's insertion about and the latest author, the Deuteronomistic author, is really only talking about that political descendant of David and the political entity of Israel. But this is a passage that was latched onto by Christians in various times, or going back as far as the earliest Christian church, I'm sure, but especially again during that the Middle Ages, the medieval church really latched onto this part, and we might almost say commandeered this passage to be messianic. It's really not a messianic prophecy, but it became one. It's understood by most biblical scholars to not be a messianic prophecy. It's just talking about David's literal earthly kingdom and his descendants and a promise of hope towards that future. But it was adopted, it became thought of as a messianic prophecy, and not just by Christians. Even before Jesus, the Jews had started to see some messianic message in here. But just keep in mind that's not, and is it wrong for us to do that? Not necessarily. Just keep in mind, though, that wasn't always the case. That wasn't the point and intent of the original author, or authors, I should say, to do that. Good morning, Shar. Good to have you joining with us this morning as well. All right. And it ends with saying that Nathan spoke all these words to David. So apparently he did give the message to David, right? He did as he was asked. He did as he was instructed by God. All right. So let's read the second half of chapter 7. Okay. This is scene 2. Scene 2. That would have been end scene. Now we're on scene 2, which is David. And it's a prayer of David. We have seen David pray in the past. So here's a couple things I want you to pay attention to, to listen for. See, first of all, does this sound like David's prayers of the past? Because in the past, of course, they were much briefer in written form anyway, and they seem to be very intimate. They seem to be very intimate. Now that David is king, his style of prayer seems to have changed. Okay, so let's read this second half. So picking up with verse 18. Then King David went in and sat before Yahweh and said, "Who am I, O Lord Yahweh? And what is my house that you have brought me thus far? And yet this was a small thing in your eyes, O Lord Yahweh. You have spoken also of your servant's house for a great while to come. May this be instruction for the people, O Lord Yahweh. And what more can David say to you? For you know your servant, O Lord Yahweh. Because of your promise and according to your own heart, you have wrought all this greatness so that your servant may know it. Therefore you are great, O Yahweh God. For there is no one like you, and there is no God besides you, according to all that we have heard with our ears. Who is like your people? Who is like your people, like Israel? Is there another nation on earth whose God went to redeem it as a people and to make a name for himself, doing great and awesome things for them by driving out before his people nations and their gods? And you established your people Israel for yourself to be your people forever. And you, O Yahweh, became their God. And now, O Yahweh God, as for the word that you have spoken concerning your servant and concerning his house, confirm it forever. Do as you have promised. Thus, your name will be magnified forever in the saying, Yahweh of hosts is God over Israel. and the house of your servant David will be established before you. For you, O Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, have made this revelation to your servant, saying, I will build you a house. Therefore, your servant has found courage to pray this prayer to you. And now, O Lord Yahweh, you are God, and your words are true, and you have promised this good thing to your servant. Now, therefore, may it please you to bless the house of your servant, so that it may continue forever before you. For you, O Lord Yahweh, have spoken, and with your blessing shall the house of your servant be blessed forever. Period. End of chapter. We might want to add amen at the end of that, right, as a prayer. Oh, but that was the prayer of David following his discussion with Nathan. That is a very interesting prayer. Very interesting prayer. You probably picked up on it. It sounds nothing like anything that David has said to God before. And it sounds nothing like anything that David has said to God before. David in the past seems to always be in communication with God, virtual constant communication, and very intimate relationship taking place with God. And anytime he's asked God things, he's gone directly and all that. This one is very formal in language and in structure, very formal in language and in structure. He starts off with those words, who am I? Who am I, O Lord Yahweh? Which is interesting. But it's who am I? It's a very subservient beginning to this. It's saying, it's kind of like saying, oh man, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy to speak. I'm not worthy to speak with you or to be here with you. That's kind of what this is. Who am I? I'm nothing. I am just a worm. And yet you have done all these amazing things for me. And so it starts off with all of this praise of who God is, and that's the celebration of and praise for everything that God has done for David. And then there is the doxology, or I'm sorry, the request at the end. But even beyond just that beginning, it's very subservient. David uses the words, I am your servant, I am servant, servant's house, etc. He uses the word servant 7 times or something like that. I remember, I forget my count. So he's really showing himself to be in a subservient role to God, to Yahweh. Now, David's titles for God change. He uses a couple different titles for God, and it's interesting. He goes from saying Lord Yahweh to saying Yahweh God. Does it make a difference? Well, kind of it does, because they mean different things contextually. But here's the biggest point, 2 points. One is how many times he uses it, how many times he uses those terms, and how often those words, like Moses. Okay, yeah, like Moses, yes. Okay, gotcha, like Moses. So he uses terms. He uses these terms. They're not used elsewhere in the books of Samuel. These terms for God, the Hebrew terms, Adonai, Yahweh, aren't used together anywhere else in Samuel. Okay, it is very often used in the book of Ezekiel, which comes from, most likely anyway, comes from the time of the exile. So we're pretty sure that this section was probably written by that Deuteronomistic author from the period of the exile. If for no other reason, we can kind of identify it because of that language. Now, again, this is probably part of this dates earlier, and then parts of it date later. So parts of it are probably, especially like that, who am I? who am I, oh God, that and who's my house, etc. But these insertions of the particular titles for God are probably coming from a later time, changing the meaning to an extent. But David gets bold in this prayer. He starts off with that, who am I? And then he talks, he praises God about all these things and keeps saying, I'm your servant, I'm your servant, I'm your servant. But he uses a Hebrew word that gets translated and now. It means and now. For instance, this might be the first time he uses it, is verse 25. It says, and now, O Hashem, O Yahweh God, as for the word that you have spoken. Then he's going to use it, I think, 2 more times. Comes up there in 28, and now. And then I think it's also there actually in 29, even though it just says now, therefore. I think it should be more of an and now, therefore. What does that mean? That's because of this, I'm making a request. And now, O Yahweh God, as for the word that you have spoken, he reminds God of the promise that God just made. He reminds God of the promise that God just made. What's interesting is he had just spoken about the Exodus. There's that Exodus language in there, the story in there. This is why God, we know that you came. What other God is going to do this to redeem your people and to redeem your people, to do amazing things so that your name may be praised, was part of that. And if you went through Exodus with me, you saw that. You've read that. And you did all of those things. You did all those things to make a name for yourself, to establish your name on earth. But now he's going to say that your name and your praise of your name is going to be attached to you fulfilling this promise to me. Ooh. You'll have to reread that part of it. I'm perhaps too sure to get, because I might not be saying it clearly enough for you. But he is attaching God's promise and the fulfillment of God's promise to the remembrance and proclamation of God's name. It's almost like a warning. If you don't do this, your name won't be remembered. And your name won't be praised and proclaimed. We could see that. We could see that in there. So what this is doing, especially here at the ending, David, or the Deuteronomistic author, is almost connecting David to God and connecting God's name and David's house, his dynasty, very close together, and almost making David God's representative. We might go that far, maybe not, but it is only through you fulfilling this promise that you just made to me that your name is going to be proclaimed from here on out. So don't forget to do it. So he's very, excuse me again. He is he's bold. He's very bold in it. Let me see here. David Brueggemann describes this prayer. Oh boy, there it is. Oh, yeah, he describes it as deference, doxology, and demand. He doesn't even call it a petition at the ending. It's much more of a demand than it is a petition. Much more of a demand than a petition. All right. And the end of chapter 7. The end of chapter 7. Woo. So, my friends, I do pray that this was beneficial to you, that you learned something or relearned something today, that God spoke to you in some way through what we said, what we've read. As you go about your days, not just today, but every day, keep those eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open to everything that our living, loving, active God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, thank you, God. and then tell somebody about it. Tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends.